Hi, my name is Pat, and this is my channel, Book Chat with Pat, and I'm glad that you're here. Today is Poetry Thursday, and in this episode, I'm going to focus on the frequently requested poet Robert Frost. Now, there is so much to say about Robert Frost that I easily could make this several episodes, and I just may do that. But in this episode, I hope to do an introduction to Robert Frost and to share a few of his best loved poems. Although we often tend to think of Robert Frost as a New England poet, he was actually born in San Francisco, California in 1874. And he grew up in Pennsylvania and then Massachusetts. And he attended both Dartmouth College and Harvard University, although he did not obtain a degree from either one. He worked as a teacher, a cobbler, and a journalist before he published his first poem in a New York newspaper, The Independent, in 1894, when he was just 20 years old. In 1895, he married Eleanor Miriam White, who was his co-valedictorian with him in high school. They moved to England in 1912, and they stayed there until 1915, during which time Frost would meet many famous poets of the day, including Ezra Pound, who was actually instrumental in furthering Robert Frost's career as a poet. He also met Rupert Brooke and Robert Graves during this time in England. By the time the Frosts moved back to the United States, he had already published his first two books of poetry, A Boy's Will in 1913 and North of Boston in 1914, establishing his reputation as a great poet. He published several additional books of poetry from the 1920s through the 1940s, making him easily the most famous poet in the United States. He won 4 Pulitzer Prizes for his books of poetry. He was appointed the United States Poet Laureate in 1958. He also received the Congressional Gold Medal in 1960. And in 1961, he was named Poet Laureate of the state of Vermont. Although Frost is often considered a poet of the New England landscape and a poet of very traditional forms, his poetry is also concerned with darker meditations on universal themes, and it is written in language that is actually spoken. Poet Randall Jarrell said that Frost was the greatest American poet of the 20th century. He went on to say, quote, "No other living poet has written so well about the actions of ordinary men. His wonderful dramatic monologues or dramatic scenes come out of a knowledge of people that few poets have had, and they are written in a verse that uses, sometimes with absolute mastery, the rhythms of actual speech." While Dartmouth College and Harvard University both have very strong ties to and claims to Robert Frost, my alma mater, Middlebury College in Vermont, does as well. From 1921 to 1962, Frost spent almost every summer teaching at the Breadloaf School of English of Middlebury College. And the Breadloaf School of English is where I got my master's degree. This is Middlebury College's mountain campus in Ripton, Vermont. He is credited with being a major influence upon the development of the graduate school in English and also its world-famous Writers' Conference. The college now owns and maintains Frost's former Ripton, Vermont farmstead, which is a National Historic Landmark. It's on the Breadloaf campus. I certainly studied Frost in my undergraduate years at Middlebury. This book, this collection, Selected Poems of Robert Frost, I've had for almost 50 years. I used this in an English class that I took, I think, probably as a freshman in college. But it was really in my graduate school years at Middlebury's Breadloaf School of English that I really learned about the man behind the poetry, as his Homer Noble farmhouse has become a major part of the Breadloaf School of English campus. The entire School of English would come together for a picnic on the grounds of Frost's farmhouse at the start of every summer of study. And the director of the school would lead tours of Frost's house, and I took the tour every summer. Imagine my sense of horror when I learned that in December of 2007, over a Christmas break, a bunch of local high school kids broke into the farmhouse and hosted a drunken party that quickly turned horribly destructive. Word of the vandalism in the house actually made it to the New York Times, which reported that more than 30 kids had destroyed the furniture inside the house, using some of it for a fire in the fireplace. They broke windows and screens, and they left vomit and other bodily fluids all over the house. A passing hiker noticed a few days later, a few days after the party, that the door to the farmhouse was open, and he alerted the authorities at Middlebury College, and the investigation began. The college, with the help of local police, eventually identified 28 of the partygoers, which included a 17-year-old who had worked in the kitchen at the Breadloaf School of English during the previous summer session, when he scoped out Frost's house and thought that it would be a great place for a party. 28 teens were prosecuted for criminal trespass and unlawful mischief. There seemed to be a horrible disconnect among many of the kids involved, who seemed somehow not to fully understand the seriousness of what they had done and the absolute violation of what is to many almost a sacred place. One teen actually asked if he could post his mugshot on Facebook. Several of the teens were ordered to perform community service and to pay restitution to the college for the property damage. The college itself came up with a creative way to deal with the vandals. In the New York Times article on the vandalism, one of my mentors, Professor John Elder, who is a professor of both English and environmental studies, said that he wondered what possibilities the destruction might provide. Could the violation of Frost lead to a celebration of Frost? Elder wondered. Well, that is exactly what the college decided to do. In addition to the penalties from the courts, all of the teens involved were required to attend 2 court-ordered sessions with Professor J. Perini, Middlebury College English professor and acclaimed biographer of Robert Frost. Perini said that he wanted the vandals to understand how Frost was able to speak as a common man, a farmer in Ripton, Vermont, and in that voice relate all the important things to know in life. Perini said that he felt that he had done what could be done. And as for the perpetrators, he said, where they take this will be their business. Robert Frost served as the first ever inaugural poet, reading his poem, The Gift, outright at the inauguration of John F. Kennedy in January of 1961. Frost died 2 years later in January of 1963. That fall, Amherst College invited President John F. Kennedy to speak at an event honoring the beloved poet. On October 26th, 1963, at Amherst, Kennedy delivered a spectacular speech mirroring back to Frost that deep dedication to the arts and celebrated role of the artist in society. President Kennedy's speech has been included in the collection Farewell, Godspeed, the Greatest Eulogies of Our Time. President Kennedy said, quote, "Strength takes many forms, and the most obvious forms are not always the most significant. The men who create power make an indispensable contribution to the nation's greatness. But the men who question power make a contribution just as indispensable, especially when that questioning is disinterested, for they determine whether we use power or power uses us." Robert Frost coupled poetry and power, for he saw poetry as the means of saving power from itself. When power leads men towards arrogance, poetry reminds him of his limitations. When power narrows the areas of man's concern, poetry reminds him of the richness and diversity of his existence. When power corrupts, poetry cleanses. For art establishes the basic human truth which must serve as the touchstone of our judgment. I completely recommend that you read all of President Kennedy's eulogy for Robert Frost. It is indeed one of the most spectacular speeches, certainly that President Kennedy President Kennedy ever gave. And so now, how about some poetry? As I said, there are so many poems that I could read that I would have to make future episodes in order to include them all. And I'm just going to read a handful here today. Some of these, I think, will be recognized as they are among Frost's most well-known poems, and a few perhaps will be new to some of you. I'm going to be reading from the collected poems, complete and unabridged. The first poem that I would like to read is entitled Mending Wall. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen groundswell under it and spills the upper boulders in the sun and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. The work of hunters is another thing. I have come after them and made repair where they have left not one stone on a stone, but they would have the rabbit out of hiding to please the yelping dogs. The gaps, I mean. No one has seen them made or heard them made, but at spring mending time we find them there. I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line and set the wall between us once again. We keep the wall between us as we go, to each the boulders that have fallen to each. And some are loaves and some so nearly balls, we have to use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. We wear our fingers rough with handling them. Oh, just another kind of outdoor game, one on a side. It comes to little more. There, where it is, we do not need the wall. He is all pine, and I am apple orchard. My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines, I tell him. He only says, good fences make good neighbors. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows? But here there are no cows. Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. I could say elves to him, but it's not elves exactly, and I'd rather he said it for himself. I see him there, bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand, like an old stone savage armed. He moves in darkness, as it seems to me, not of woods only and the shade of trees. He will not go behind his father's saying, and he likes having thought of it so well. He says again, good fences make good neighbors. Next, fire and ice. Some say the world will end in fire. Some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. Dust of snow. The way a crow shook down on me the dust of snow from a hemlock tree has given my heart a change of mood and saved some part of a day I had rued. The oven bird. There is a singer everyone has heard, loud, a midsummer and a midwood bird, who makes the solid tree trunks sound again. He says that leaves are old, and that for flowers, midsummer is to spring as 1 to 10. He says the early petal fall is past, when pear and cherry bloom went down in showers on sunny days, a moment overcast. And comes that other fall we name the fall. He says the highway dust is over all. The bird would cease and be as other birds, but that he knows in singing not to sing. The question that he frames in all but words is what to make of a diminished thing. Acquainted with the night. I have been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. I have outwalked the furthest city light. I have looked down the saddest city lane. I have passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. I have stood still and stopped the sound of feet when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street. but not to call me back or say goodbye, and further still, at an unearthly height, one luminary clock against the sky proclaimed the time was neither wrong nor right. I have been one acquainted with the night. Stopping by woods on a snowy evening. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. And finally, the road not taken. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So that's just a little bit about Robert Frost. As always, I thank you for watching. I hope that you're doing well. I'll speak with you again soon. Take care.